And we're Hello, y'all. Welcome to the BirthFit podcast. This is Dr. Lindsay Matthews Cantu, and we were just talking about titles. Nobody ever calls me doctor. They just say, hey, Lindsay. So welcome back, y'all. BirthFit community, what's up? So glad to be talking to y'all again. This is episode number 243, and we're going to get into all things cold therapy, cold plunges with the one and only Professor Thomas Seager. And before we get in, I want to give a shout out to our nonprofit, BirthFit nonprofit. We are looking for women to support this fall. And if you're in the military or your husband is active duty military, definitely go over to that website, nonprofit.birthfit.com. Fill out an application if you would like a doula, and let's see if we can support you. This has been a passion project of mine for a while, and it's slowly coming to fruition. We've helped a handful of women in the past, but we've got some great funding. And if you want to donate, BirthFit is going to match donations in August up to a certain amount. But get over there and let's try to raise $10,000. Let's try to raise $7,000, $5,000. Because the more money we raise, the more women we can help. And the more women we help, we're basically helping our community, our country, because these women have dedicated their lives, their family lives, their husbands' lives to this great country. All right. So let's dig in. All right. Professor Thomas, I'm going to call you Tom as you gave me permission. Welcome to the BirthFit podcast. I am stoked to have you here. I first heard you speak on my friend Dr. Stanton Holmes' podcast. And I don't even know if you remember that because we've been trying to sync up and schedule for months. But I really, really loved just how like a trailblazer you are with Morozco and the cold plunge and the research there, but also you speak truth in other aspects. And I really appreciate that. And, if you're on Stan's podcast, I know that you're probably a freedom fighter and maybe not subscribe to some of the woke idealism that's going on in the world today. But first, before we go down any rabbit holes, I want you to introduce yourself, let people know who you are, the company that you founded, how cool it is. And let's start there.
Thanks for having me here, Lindsay. This is a pleasure.
Yeah.
Right. My name is Tom Seager, and I'm an engineer, which is why I'm a little self-conscious. If people call me doctor in a setting like this, they'll think I'm a medical doctor, but I make machines. I don't prescribe pills. I never went to medical school. And I think that's been a big advantage in the last 2 or 3 years because I can be oriented towards the data, towards the experience, what is actually working, rather than towards the ideological or the pharmacological agenda that medical schools seem to have been captured by. So I started in the environment. I was an environmental engineer way back, got to go 30 years back. And I'm like, we want to clean up pollution and whatever. I pivoted, or I evolved to disaster resilience. I'm a civil and environmental engineer. How do I help people recover from the hurricanes, the wildfires? Because in the United States anyway, the acute pollution problems, they've been resolved. We still have hazardous waste. We still have toxics in consumer products, but we don't have the same sort of I grew up in Pittsburgh. We don't have the smokestack. We don't have the polluted rivers that we used to have. And so the world, I felt like, needed me to do a different thing. And then COVID happened. And COVID left us with a legacy of scientific censorship, mistrust, reduced life expectancy, mental health crises, a whole bunch of things that motivated me to reorient my career again. I make the machines for human resilience. Resilience is not in the concrete or in the steel. This is what I've discovered. And the things that I've been taught to look for and to work in as a civil engineer. Resilience is in the human spirit. It is in the creativity, in the adaptive problem-solving approach. So the mission of Morozco Forge, which is an ice bath company, is to share the knowledge and equipment necessary for people to choose, to take charge of their own health. Nobody trusts the CDC. Nobody trusts the FDA. Nobody trusts
No.
their medical doc. Right. You might like your medical doctor as a person, but and so, I know a lot of people who say, well, I really like my doctor. They have a really good bedside manner. I don't want to give that up. And I get it. But the institutions, whether it's the hospital or the university or the National Cancer Institute, the NIH, whatever the institutions, the Banner Health is a big one in Arizona. It could be the HMO or the insurance organization. None of these are trustworthy. And people need to know how to trust in themselves, their own judgment, their own experience, their own body. That's why I'm on this podcast, Lindsay, because, I'd love to sell ice baths, but the only reason that we sell them is because they make such an incredible difference in the metabolism, in the psychology of the people who have been metabolically and psychologically impacted, especially by the last 2 or 3 years.
Oh, that's beautiful. I want to, like, if I was on social media, I'd like.
All right, we'll put it there. Yeah.
Okay, I want to ask you what one of our big phrases here at BirthFit when we're getting ready for birth and we train mind, body, and spirit for birth is radical responsibility. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there, but how do you feel about that phrase? What comes up for you as I say that?
It's not fair. Let me see if I can explain that.
Yeah.
I learned that a birth plan is of paramount importance. And I learned that because I read Pregnancy, Childbirth, and the Newborn by Penny Simkin. Penny is my aunt. When I was ready to have kids, there was nothing else that I was going to read except the book that Penny wrote, right? So
yeah, hold on, time out, y'all. If y'all don't know Penny Simkin, she's a legendary doula.
Yeah, she founded Doulas of North America. And I didn't complete the training. I've been to her seminars, of course, and I've read her book. I was a doula for my wife for the birth of our 2 children. But what I learned, I'm not a planner, but what I learned from Penny in the birth plan is what will you do when?
Yeah.
For example, of course I wanted a natural childbirth. I'm not the one who has to go through the pain. My wife wanted that too. But when would you get an epidural is the question that Penny prompted us. When would you do continuous fetal monitoring? Just as an example, a birth plan for Penny was not a prescription of events that should happen. It was a way of anticipating all the events that could happen and planning ahead what you would do when you're faced with that contingency. Totally. Lindsay, this is so perfect for my research, in disaster resilience, because we're not predicting a wildfire. We're not predicting a flood. We say, what will we do with the military base, for example, if it becomes inundated by floodwaters? We're anticipating rather than forecasting. And then how do we adapt based upon our goals? Now, this idea of radical responsibility, it could be misinterpreted, because another thing that I learned from Penny's hilarious. She says, if you are checking your makeup before you go to the hospital, it's too soon. She's like, you go to the hospital only after you have lost any shred of self-confidence.
You got mascara running down your face.
Right. The point is that when the woman is in the throes of childbirth, she is not prepared for this radical responsibility. She is working on something. It could be her breath, or it could be pain management, or it could be courage. She's busy. The birth plan is there so that her doula and whomever her birth partner is can say, this is the plan. We've prepared for this contingency. She's no longer asked to make decisions. You don't ask her in that moment. No. Are we ready to get the forceps out? Would that be okay with you? She's already said what her preferences are. Yeah. When someone is debilitated, and it's not just during childbirth, it could be any patient in any hospital setting, is in a decompensated state in which their judgment is no longer to be trusted. What the
Yeah.
birth plan did for me and my wife was say, we have agreed that
Yeah.
when this shows up, we will do this. When this shows up, we will do this. And it allowed me to be a better doula because I could act with confidence, even if she's, gosh, Lindsay, my youngest daughter, she turned 26 yesterday.
Oh
And
my
it
goodness.
brought me back. Like, we have this tradition in our family on the birthdays when the kids were little that we would tell the story of their birth. And of course, that story, it evolves in greater detail, as
Yeah.
they get older and they're able to understand it better.
Yeah.
Because these birth stories are so powerful for making meaning of the experience. And part of the story of her birth was when my wife said, I'm ready for a break. I don't think I can do this anymore, That's one of those critical moments. But we got that break. It was dawn, and it was because yesterday, the days are really long at the end of July. And we had that moment that Penny talks about, and it was probably like a 60-second nap.
Yeah.
The transaction stopped. She shut her eyes. I shut my eyes. And I don't know how long it was, but we sort of woke up, and I said, it's time to push this baby out. It's
Oh,
not your decision anymore. It is the radical responsibility comes long before the event.
yes.
You
Yeah.
must prepare for conception. You must prepare for pregnancy. You must prepare for the childbirth. And even though I thought uh, C-section would be a failure, a lot of women carry shame or regret or lots of feelings around their birth stories. What Penny forced us to do was say, under what circumstances would we consider C-section a
Mhm.
victory? And we thought,
Mm.
you know what? If this happens, if this happens, if this
Yeah.
happens, yeah, that's what we're going to do. We had the most beautiful birth, especially for our second. Emma came out, and we were so relieved and happy and full of joy. And then we got the hell out of there. Like,
Bye. Thank you.
right? We were in New York State,
Oh,
and we
wow.
were warned that if we left the hospital without the, I don't know, silver chloride swabs and not the
Yeah.
vaccines that they're supposed to do, and they would report us to Child Protective Services.
Mhm.
And I said, go ahead. And they
Yeah.
did. But we live right across the street from the hospital, for goodness sakes. It's like we didn't even have a car seat. And they thought, we're criminal, but we're carrying our baby home because we didn't drive here.
Oh my
Our,
goodness.
right? Our OBGYN and our pediatrician, they live right next door. Their children babysit for us. So we said, the hospital is no place for healthy people to be. And the
Right.
only reason we birthed at the hospital is because our OBGYN begged us to do it. She said,
Mm.
this is New York. I cannot attend a childbirth at home unless it is some extraordinary emergency. Please don't put me in a position. And we said, okay, Sandy, we'll cross the street for you. But we got the hell out of there as soon as we felt like we were ready.
Yeah.
Not when the hospital board or the Child Protective Services said that we were allowed to go. And that was pretty important to us. We got
Yeah.
home. Emma slept through the night. Like the
Aw.
oh, I know, right? I know it's unusual and it's rare, and people are probably saying, oh, you're so lucky. I'll tell you about our son a different time. But we had such a terrific experience with our second that I think that was part of the way she came into the world, kind of chill,
Yeah.
relaxed, at ease, confident. It also helped that she had older brothers, to sort of watch out over her, her
Yeah.
childhood experience. But I was reminiscing because it was her birthday and she's 26 now.
Aw.
Yeah.
I love that. That's beautiful. That's a great story. And yeah, if y'all don't know Penny Simpkin, definitely look her up, look up her books. They're
It is
still
the
relevant.
most
Yeah.
wonderful book. It's not, what to expect when you're
Yeah.
expecting. It's not a pop book. And she didn't sell it with clickbait headlines and things
No.
like that. It doesn't even have a verb in the title: pregnancy,
Yeah.
childbirth, and the newborn.
Yeah. Yeah. I had the I actually got to hear her speak one time. It was very early on in my doula career in Los Angeles, and I think it was like 2011, 2010, but Oh, she ignited a fire within me for sure. I
She
love it.
has a way of doing that, and you can still see her on YouTube. She's passed on, um,
Yeah.
but she lives past her sort of corporal
Yeah.
existence because she had such a gentle way about her. And then
Totally.
here you are, in the audience feeling fired up by
Oh,
all
I'm
this
like,
sort of,
yeah.
yeah, right? By this gentle energy. You're not Penny is never gonna like get a megaphone and say, "Let's go, people."
No.
Instead, she's gonna say, so, the baby might be upside down late into your pregnancy, and you might hear that this is a cause for concern. These are some of the options that are available to you, or to
Yeah,
whatever.
totally.
Yep. But it
No
was about
stress.
empowering the
Mhm.
parents to make their own
Absolutely.
decisions, because in that moment when you're in the hospital or wherever you are, you will feel somewhat incapacitated. You will feel fear. You will feel all of these emotions that make it easy for people to manipulate you to
Totally.
their own ends, to their own. Well, this baby's got to come out. My shift ends or whatever. We're gonna crank up the pitocin or whatever it is,
Yeah, yeah.
because somebody else has something in mind.
Somebody
And
else has a different agenda.
yep.
Yeah.
So that's Morozco. Morozco is about empowering you to do. I mean, trying to bring it back here.
No, yeah,
Morozco
we are.
Morocco is about empowering you to choose for yourself what works for you so you can meet your own health goals. Take charge of your
Totally.
own health. Mhm.
So you can meet the most optimal version of yourself.
Which
I,
we never attain.
never,
We only
never.
become sort of closer approximations of the people we really wish we
Yeah,
were. Yeah.
yeah. So you hit on the fact that the radical responsibility part happens happens before this event, happens, before this experience in which we've entered the portal of birth, or we're, not in our thinking brain. And I think you nailed it. And we also have a phrase that we birth how we live, and that includes lifestyle practices, and that includes all the things you did preconception. So let's get into some of the cold plunge benefits and research, specifically like along the preconception lines. And I want to get into some, and you definitely can share about this, the metabolic health. Like the metabolic health in our country is terrible. I think I read a stat the other day that there was like less than 7% of Americans are metabolically healthy, which is what? So can you elaborate on that a little
Yeah.
bit?
When I met my wife, her son was 7. And so we got married, and I wasn't even a stepdad. It's not like I adopted her son, but I became a father before I really became a
Yeah.
father. And of course, when we had our first child together, her birth story from her first birth was very important. She was young, 21, and you think, oh, she must be metabolically fit.
Yeah.
But her son was born almost 6 weeks premature and very, what's the word? Skinny. That he was a long
Yeah.
baby, 22
Yeah.
inches, but barely over 5 pounds.
Oh,
And
wow.
so now he's 6'4" and he's ripped, and it all has a happy story ending, Lindsay. But at the time, she suffered from toxemia. What did she
Mm.
know? She didn't
Yeah.
know about nutrition. She didn't know about metabolism. She
Yeah.
really wanted to avoid a C-section, but she went to the hospital. They put her on bed rest. They induced her early, and although it all came out fine, for her second baby, my first, the emotional flashback of the first experience,
Yeah.
came on. She wanted to be more prepared, and by now, she's 30. So we took Bradley method classes.
Cool.
That seemed
Yeah.
like a good thing to
Yeah.
do. And we're in there with the other couples, and we're reading Penny's book, and we're reading about protein. And my wife computed how much protein she was supposed to take in, right? This is a
Mm.
wonderful thing, because she read that inadequate protein intake, especially during the last trimester, is associated with toxemia. And there's a lot of words here: preeclampsia,
Yeah.
gestational diabetes, eclampsia, all this constellation of metabolically related diagnoses that women at risk or can be at risk for late in their pregnancy. So she, and I forget what it was, how many grams, but after our Bradley method class, I would take her to Wendy's and she would have a triple cheeseburger and she'd say, it's not enough. I'm not getting enough protein.
I need more.
Right. I know. And I'm like, what are you talking about? She says, I've added it up, I would go get her a fillet of fish. And late into these Bradley method classes, we were driving back from Wendy's and she said, Tom, I think one of the women in the classes, her ankles look really swollen. And, she showed me how she can push her finger into her flesh around her ankles and it doesn't bounce back. It just it's like it's memory foam or something, right? She goes, I think that woman is suffering from the same thing that I had for my first birth. And so I asked her about it. She said, oh, my doctor says it's all normal swelling and blah, blah, blah.
Oh, wow.
Lindsay, that one woman wasn't in our next class. She was in the hospital. My wife correctly, in our amateur way, diagnosed that woman's preeclampsia. And I don't know how her birth story came out, but hospitals are very used to seeing this so often that they call it normal. Yeah. Because it's what you said, 93% of the American population is already metabolically disordered. And a young age is no protection. You'd think that your mitochondria would be in good shape, right? But it is no longer a good protection against this risk of metabolic dysfunction because children now are growing up with seed oils. They're growing up with the blue screen light headed into their eyes all hours of the night. They're growing up on high carbohydrate processed foods. And so we're seeing metabolic dysfunction, which is essentially mitochondrial damage at younger and younger ages, to the extent where the hospitals think that preeclampsia, toxemia, gestational insulin resistance is all just normal.
Right. It's common, but not normal.
Right. Just because it happens all the time doesn't mean it's normal. It wasn't normal for our grandmothers because it is not the state in which our bodies are supposed to. I'm using this word, have evolved is a better way to say it, have evolved to exist. So what can you do? Pregnancy is a physiological state of insulin resistance, not a pathological state. Pregnancy and puberty, there's so much growth hormone, and the growth hormone interferes with the action of insulin. So to some extent, pregnancy is physiologically a state of insulin resistance. But when you layer that physiological insulin resistance on top of a metabolic dysfunction or mitochondrial damage, that's when you get pathological. That's when the insulin resistance has gone too far. One of the best things you can do for your metabolism is cold plunge therapy because it stimulates mitobiogenesis. So now your body is making new mitochondria. It clears glucose from your bloodstream. And you can use a continuous glucose monitor now. At the time, they weren't available, but you can use a CGM to measure this for yourself if you like. I've got lots of good data, and there are good clinical studies on how cold will recruit new brown fat. Brown fat will convert T3, so the T3 form of thyroid hormone, which is inactive, to T4, which is the more active. Brown fat communicates with the thyroid and thyroid communicates with the brown fat to regulate metabolism, just as another example. When you get cold, you improve your metabolic function and better prepare yourself for conception and pregnancy and childbirth, which is the most metabolically demanding thing a human being do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think you hit on it. Like, I've been taking notes too over here. We have mitochondria. For those that have no idea what this is, like a mitochondria is the energy house inside of each cell. And like you said, there's so much dysfunction, derangement with our children nowadays because, and we look back at their moms during the pregnancy, their mother's overall health. And so if we're thinking about the kids these days, and this is just me reflecting, like, okay, I was born in the 80s. I grew up on the standard American diet, the very like fast food, TV dinners, highly processed. And if I didn't ever wake up, I'd probably still be eating lots of that, lots of seed oils. And then getting pregnant, like you said, if I'm already in a deranged state, going into pregnancy, that's going to create pathology. Pregnancy isn't, you're not fragile, you're not broken. It's beautiful. It's the greatest kind of expression of health in a woman. And it's a damn miracle that some women get pregnant being so dysfunction within their health already. But yeah, that's what creates the pathology. And I think that's you nailed it. The more we can do ahead of time for our health, the better. That's the radical responsibility part. That's the lifestyle practices.
Everyone understands that. Like,
Yeah,
but when you go to your medical doctor, say, "Oh, we're going to do B12 injections,"
yeah,
or and that's okay. I'm not knocking it.
yeah.
But there are some basic lifestyle things that are often overlooked by the medical establishment.
Oh,
So,
there's a lot.
light hygiene. You know, sorry, yeah,
There's a lot.
yeah. I'm gonna see if I can draw some attention to a few of them. You gotta get your light right. So
Circadian rhythm.
you got it. Shut down the light when it's
Yeah,
supposed to be dark. And people wear blue light blockers, and I get what they're going for.
they're
But during
trying.
the day, well,
Yeah.
the sky is blue, for goodness sakes. Get out in the sun. Get the
Yeah,
infrared and the UV from the sun. Everything that you've heard about sunscreen is bullshit.
yeah. Your mitochondria needs the light. It responds to the light.
Exactly right. They need the infrared. They need that
Yeah,
invisible part of the spectrum that our high efficiency windows, because I live in
yeah.
Arizona, will block out to reduce our air conditioning bills. Like,
Wow.
it's a very practical kind of thing. But the fact is, in Arizona in the summertime, people are light deficient. They're sunlight deficient because they never go
They don't get
outside,
the vitamin D or
right?
the melatonin's
Yep.
off. Yeah,
Yep,
okay.
you got it. So get your vitamin
Wow.
D right. And I want to come back to that. It's okay to eat carbs as long as you take breaks from carbs. And I'm not advocating for, Twix or Snickers or something like that. I'm saying carbs will stress your mitochondria just like exercise does,
Yeah.
just like a cold plunge does.
Mhm.
You need a break from carbs to allow mitobiogenesis, to allow your carbs or your mitochondria to recover from that stress. And
Mm,
so, for people who are not pregnant, intermittent fasting. I'm
yeah.
not suggesting intermittent fasting for pregnant women or for even women who are trying to conceive, but you can go keto, and you can go keto for
I
3
was
or 4
just gonna
days.
yeah, yeah. I was gonna ask you what your thoughts on keto were.
Love it.
My husband loves it, and he goes through waves of being full keto, full carnivore, but intermittent fasting. He's done the whole water fast for 10 days, but
That's wonderful.
yeah,
I'm
okay.
fasting today, but I don't know when I'm gonna stop. I woke up and I said, "You know what? Today I'm gonna fast." So I'm
Let's
doing
try
the
it.
black
Okay.
coffee, because I go in and out. But I didn't know anything about keto until my son was 6. So remember that I'm reading Penny's book, and we're doing the birth plan, and this is my first child. We lived in Northern New York, and my son was born in late October, which is a cold month in
Mhm.
Northern New York. And then we're heading into the winter. And I grew up with so many misconceptions about nutrition.
Yeah.
I blame Harvard University because,
Yeah.
Penny went to Swarthmore as an undergraduate, and my mother went to Colby. They grew up in Maine, and they went to what are now considered super elite schools. And these schools are like the bastions of woke progressive thinking. It's
Yeah.
terrible. But at the time that, my parents were there, it was kind of like, well, that's the neighborhood school, because my mother went to Colby. For her, it was right down the
Yeah.
street. A lot has changed, but something that did not change is during the 60s, Harvard was the capital of nutritional misinformation. The most influential faculty at Harvard had sold out to the seed oil industry, to the
Oh,
sugar industry, to all these big food processors, and had invented things like the cholesterol hypothesis to try and push processed food. And my mother believed it. She
oh,
believed that what counted were calories. She thought that margarine was better for you and healthier for you than
yeah.
butter, because that's what these sort of elite
Oh, totally.
institutions were telling her, right? Vitamin D, if it was in Penny's book, I don't remember it being there. And so when my son was born in the late fall, he did, he I wasn't, there would be no vitamin D to make,
Yeah,
in northern New York
yeah.
sunshine. But it wasn't like I'd focused my wife on getting a sufficient vitamin D. It wasn't like I was giving her vitamin D supplements. I didn't know. We weren't getting the infrared, from the sun that is
Totally,
still available.
totally.
And all these things that instinctually I felt, and I'm still ashamed of this, because he came down with diabetes, type 1. This is the autoimmune, not type 2 diabetes, but type 1, where
Hmm.
his body no longer makes insulin, when he was 6. And it wasn't
Mhm.
until years later that I picked up a Reader's Digest in the frickin' dentist office. I know they don't have them anymore, but and there was an article, there was a study in Finland, longitudinal study, tracked women for 20 years. And those that got vitamin D supplements during their pregnancy and during the first year of their infant's life had much lower incidence of type 1 diabetes diagnoses in their children. A vitamin D insufficiency is associated with increased risk of autoimmune disorders of all types. And
For
one of them
sure.
is type 1 diabetes. And so what I'm saying is, take care of your circadian rhythm, your light hygiene, get the seed oils out of your diet, because those seed oils are incorporated into your cell membranes and they will cause a dysfunction in your membranes. Limit your carbohydrate intake, and especially take breaks if you're going to binge on something. Those fruit juice smoothies, they are no good for you. They
Yeah,
are diabetes bombs. It's what my daughter calls them now. You got to stay away from that, and monitor your vitamin D levels. Ensure you're getting enough. Supplements are not ideal, but if you find yourself in a deficient or an insufficient
yeah,
situation, then get the supplements to remedy that immediately, and then go to the UV, build up a solar callus, get more sunshine. Cold exposure is an important part of all of these things that
yeah,
I've mentioned, that people neglect, because our ancient grandmothers evolved to expect cold. And this is
mhm,
where I'm going to depart, Lindsay, from the clinical research, and I'm going to tell a story. This is about
great.
the ancestral wisdom of cold. You are probably familiar with the idea of a water birth and how the
I've had a water
hydrotherapy,
birth. Yeah,
right? Like, who wouldn't want that? It reduces it has an analgesic effect. The sort of
mhm.
pressure will take away some of the pain of the contractions, and it's
Takes the
relaxing.
edge off.
Yeah. Were you instructed that you got to get out of the water as soon as your own water breaks to avoid the possibility of infection?
No, because I was kinda not in the traditional world. My water had started leaking 2 or 3 days before, and I'm 40 years old. I've had this company for 10 years, long story short, and I've done the research. I was like, I'm not going to go to the hospital because, first of all, they're going to label me geriatric. And,
Yeah.
so I got in the tub at the last minute and I was like, we're doing this.
Yep. I don't want to say it's impossible to have an infection. Like,
Right.
the the precaution is exceedingly conservative, but it's there.
Especially in
And
our country, that's really like, yeah.
exactly, what temperature water did you draw for your bath?
Oh, geez.
Right.
I don't even remember.
No one would ever put a woman in a cold water therapy for her water birth. They're like, that's just so cruel. And yet, the cold also has analgesic effects. And
Yeah.
yet, the cold will help reduce inflammation in the legs, and the vasoconstriction will help move blood to where you really need. Why not cold? When I'm
Yeah.
telling this
Yeah.
story, and the heat is a bad idea. Like, don't make it a hot bath. But when I'm telling the story of our ancestral grandmothers, where would they have gone for their water births? They don't have running water. They go into the
Yeah.
stream. They go into
Yeah.
the river. You're like, okay, that makes sense to me. And they didn't
Yeah.
worry about whether their water had broken or not broken. They're
Totally.
seeking relief, right? This is a better birthing experience for them. What temperature was that water? The oldest human fossils are in East Africa. And maybe we'll discover something that, sort of causes us to doubt the out of Africa hypothesis. But we
Yeah.
know that Homo sapiens were in East Africa. East Africa is on the equator. You think, well, that water must have been warm. But there are 4 modern glaciers in East Africa. And during the Ice Age, like, East Africa was covered with snow and ice. Our ancient ancestors had to eke out a meager existence at the water's edge to survive what are called these population bottlenecks. So 70,000 years ago, some volcano erupts and it spews ash into the atmosphere, and you have 3 years of perpetual winter. The plants aren't growing, the animals can't eat. You gotta live on fish and shellfish in the water.
Mhm.
This is called the aquatic hypothesis. We are aquatic creatures. Our
Love it.
nostrils point down so that, not
Can
out
blow
like
out.
bonobos or
Yeah.
chimpanzees, but down so that we can dive without forcing the water up into our skulls. We have all this subcutaneous fat. I've got a lot of it right underneath the skin to sort of keep us warm in the water.
Yeah.
Chimps and apes and bonobo, they don't have that stuff. Dolphins, whales, manatee, the aquatic mammals have that. And we are aquatic. And guess what, Lindsay?
That's cool.
Our babies are born with an instinct to swim. You know
Totally.
why?
Totally.
Right. Because they were born in the water.
Yeah.
And
I
that
saw it.
Oh, exactly. And there's some really good studies on this, on the instinct to swim and how is that different than the usual mammalian dive reflex. And the
Yeah.
babies, our babies don't have an instinct to walk.
No.
Giraffes do, right? But our babies swim because our ancient grandmothers gave birth in the water, and the water was cold. To date, there is only one example of a woman that I've seen documented who did a cold water birth as opposed to like a tepid water birth. And she said it was great. She had a lot of
Like
experience
present
with
day.
swimming. Yeah, like in the
That's
modern
cool.
day. And I
Yeah.
think that's because, even the most radical chiropractors, Stanton, what would he say if I come in and say, oh, you should do a cold water birth,
Yeah.
get that down to about 45 degrees Fahrenheit. He'd probably say, hang on a second. That's a
Whoa,
little
whoa,
dry,
whoa.
right? No, it's not. Cold water is healthy for metabolism. The anti-inflammatory effects are healthy for a pregnant woman's body. And the cold water analgesic effects help manage the distress, the anxiety because I'm going to do a little psychology. I've never been pregnant, but I never, even though the contractions for my wife were difficult, the fear of the next contraction was worse than
Yeah.
whatever she was experiencing in that moment because
She knew it
yes,
was coming.
right. And she handled this one, but the anxiety of whether she's able to handle the next one is worse than the actual pain of the contraction.
Totally.
The ice bath is the same way. And I've talked to bodybuilders, elite athletes in the NFL, other professors. The 15 minutes before you get in the ice bath, where you're just staring at the ice.
Gentle.
Yeah, right. The worst part is right before you get in.
Yeah.
It's that anticipation. The cold plunge helps metabolically. It helps in this inflammation way, but it helps build that psychological resilience that says,
Yeah.
I can do this. I'm going to
Totally.
do this. I'm doing
Totally.
this. Mhm.
I mean, absolutely. Okay, so there's a few questions I want to ask, but what are your thoughts on the baby emerging in the cold water? Because now I'm thinking, okay, cold bath for the next one. But I've heard and read a little anecdotal studies of let's say moms in Russia leaving their babies out in the cold for naps, or dipping them in ice cold water to kind of revive them if they need a little reviving after birth. But what are your thoughts on that?
Babies have copious quantities of brown fat. And I've talked a little bit about the way the brown fat works with the thyroid, but the
Yeah.
principal function of brown fat is called non-shivering thermogenesis. You and I know, from when we were kids, or you get on the cold and your teeth are chattering, and you're like, I'm not cold, mom,
Leave me in the pool.
Exactly. Well, babies, their muscles are not mature enough to shiver and keep the baby warm. So babies are born with baby fat, both the subcutaneous and the brown fat. When a baby is cold, you don't see it shiver because the cold will activate its brown fat, and it will clear glucose, begin burning lipids that are available in the bloodstream just to generate heat. The brown fat is around the base of the neck and around the heart. It's in the core of the body, so that, when the blood is distributed to the rest of the body, will already be warmed by the brown fat. And so babies are well protected against the cold. But this idea of sort of reviving the baby is very powerful.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to think about it until I'd read John Huntsman's biography. He wrote a book called Barefoot to Billionaire. And Huntsman, he's passed on. There's John Huntsman Sr., whom I'm talking about. Junior used to be governor of Utah and is still an active leader and politician. But I'm talking about Senior. And in his autobiography, he talked about his birth. So he, I forget the year, but he was born before you could count on hot running water.
Yeah.
The idea of a hot shower is a very modern thing. And he was born in Idaho, right? There was a physician and a nurse, whom we might now call a midwife or a doula or something. I forget medically what her credentials were, but at the time they considered her a nurse. And he was born still, no breath, no signs of life. And at that moment, the physician spends a minute to see if he can, revive the baby. He's got to attend to the mother because the mom is in distress, and it is his job to save the mother's life when she is imperiled. But the nurse takes the baby and she says, this is something that we do with unattended births on the Indian reservation. You got to go back, we're talking about something that happened 100 years ago. And they had cold water and they had already made hot water. And she went back and forth between the cold and the hot, the cold and the hot. So she's using thermal contrast therapy. And at first it didn't work. And she just kept it up, because what does she have to lose?
Yeah.
And John Huntsman, in his infant state, snapped to life.
Oh, Shnikes.
Right? And so I'm like, wait a second. Now I'm beginning to get it. That tradition, whether it's Scandinavia or Finland or Russia, and you're leaving the babies out, in the cold. And you're like, well, that's crazy. Come to New York and do that. And we're going to write the parents up for child abuse or something like that.
Totally.
There is wisdom in this. So I go to the library, and this wisdom, it goes back to like Aristotle. Sure enough, when a baby is exposed to cold in its first day, like immediately, it switches on immune system functions that are not yet mature in the baby and the brown fat system in a way that makes the child more resilient to its environment. And I wish I could quote the paper that really opened my eyes on this, and I'll send it to you afterwards because I don't have immediate recall. The cold, what we would call cold shock, and it sounds terrible, but the cold is a healthy thing for the newborn to experience right after birth. I'm not saying allow your newborn to enter some sort of hypothermic state. I'm saying the cold will turn on the systems that say to this new human being, you are no longer in the womb. You're outside now. It's time to activate the mechanisms with which you are endowed for your own protection. So I don't have any misgivings about it anymore.
That's awesome. It's like, so another phrase we use is at BirthFit is to explore the range of motion of our nervous system. And, we're figuring out the adaptability versus the inflammation or the threat. And that's basically what we're doing with the infant there, introducing the cold therapy. And like you said, you're not doing it 24/7. It's small doses so they can adapt and basically make that range of motion a little bigger for their nervous system.
And by small doses, we could mean several seconds with
Yeah,
like less than a minute. Like,
yeah,
right. Just
I love it.
enough to initiate the baby's response to its new environment.
Yeah. Yeah, because they have to know you're not in the womb anymore. I want you to feel safe and warm and all that, definitely when you're sleeping or whatever.
Yep.
But they have to be activated, and I think it's a beautiful metaphor for all of parenting. You give a little bit and you bring them back in. You give a little bit of room to explore, bring them back in.
Let's imagine that the baby is born into a cold water birth. Great. You're out now. I mean, obviously, this is a
Yeah,
stressful experience. This is a
yeah,
huge transition. Boom, we've turned systems on. What are we going to do with this baby? Well, we're going to bring it up to the nipple and let it root,
yeah,
right?
right
We're
to
going to like,
mom. Yeah,
yeah, its skin temperature may be temporarily reduced by its exposure to the cold water. And then you're going to bring it straight to your chest. You're going to get the skin on skin contact.
yeah,
Hopefully, there's some colostrum in there that
yeah.
will also begin to get the baby's own independent immune system going. Huge oxytocin response between the two. How is this not a wonderful sequence of events to
Oh, I
bring the
love it.
baby into the world and prepare it for its new environment?
Yeah, I love it. And they're most likely still connected via the umbilical cord.
Yep. Yep. And they're
So,
still drawing that blood out of
yeah,
the umbilical cord. Yep.
yeah, I love it. Okay, so I know I said I could talk to you for hours now, but to be efficient, I want to get into some of the preconception stuff. And I think this is where a lot of the misconceptions were coming from that we chatted about before. We chatted a little bit about kind of Dr. Stacy Sims and her work. And, I appreciate her work, and I know you do too, for bringing light to some big conversations. But, and I've shared this before on another podcast. I feel like because she works with some of the best athletes in the world. She lives in that masculine energy of numbers and prescriptions, and there's very little flow and individual variability. But she was recently on the Huberman podcast, like we were chatting about, and said the limit of cold plunge is 55 degrees for women. I've also heard other things like only cold plunge in certain times of your cycle from her. And then I've heard from other influencers, don't cold plunge if you have a thyroid issue. Well, we want the thyroid to be efficient, and it sounds like it's, with cold plunging supports the liver and supports the thyroid. So can we dive into that a little bit before we go?
I watched Stacy on Huberman because people told me I should. I wanted to know,
Yeah,
what is she getting at? And she
yeah,
described a pilot study that she did. It was either Australia or New Zealand. Um, Women with endometriosis, and she was using cold plunge therapy, and she got really promising results that reduced the I forget what her measures were, if she even described them, but reduced this aberrant condition of endometriosis. And then she also said 55. But what she never did was say, Andrew, I've experimented a lot with my own body and cold plunge at different temperatures. And I've been taking my labs and I've been monitoring these things. And I found that 55 is about, she never said that. She just pulled
yeah.
a number out and she says, well, it's 55.
There's no
And
why.
right. Huberman did not say, that's funny, Stacy, because I've talked to, Susanna, and I've spoken with other women, and they go colder and they seem to be getting good results. He did not say, why do you say 55? And nobody elaborated. But that was the question that I wanted to, scream at the podcast. Why 55?
Yeah. Where's your reasoning?
Right. Preparing for a high jump is not the same as preparing for motherhood. And
Right.
so these are two different things. But I'm going to tell you, you know how you sell things to women? You scare them. And then you tell them
Here.
that they deserve comfort. I think this is an insidious marketing technique. women in the United States spend 80% of the discretionary income. And so even if the man is the primary breadwinner, the typical couple relationship is the man picks a truck maybe, but of
Yeah.
course he's got to have the extra seat for or whatever. But the woman picks the curtains and she picks the furniture and she does the shop, right? And so this is what they mean. 80% of the discretionary consumer spending choices are made by women. And so advertisers have learned to cater to women. Advertising is a female-oriented, sort of gynocentric profession. The
Totally.
media companies that owe their revenues to the advertisers organize their editorial content around women to try and attract women to the channel and please the advertisers. And what do advertisers say? You should be comfortable. You should have a spa day. You should get together with the girls and have a mimosa. You need a cucumber facial with a chocolate mask. All those things that you would feel guilty about if you ate them, you should put them on your body instead. The advertisers are notorious for manipulating women into spending money on things that aren't good for them. The male thing, why does David Goggins resonate with young men? Because Goggins is out there saying, stay hard, suck it up. Don't be a pussy. He will use this masculine, feminine dynamic to motivate men to compete harder. Nobody's coming to save you. Nobody cares. Work harder. All of these are targeted towards males and whatever it is that they think might help them achieve their goals in their lives. David Goggins does not sell books to women. The way to sell books to young women is about beauty and comfort and harmony. And okay.
Totally.
When you come out and you're going to cold plunge and you say, Joe Rogan, Gary Brecka asked him, I haven't seen evidence that going colder is better. Why do you do it? And Joe says, because it's hard. You're not going to sell to women that way. Cold plunge sucks. Nobody enjoys it.
You enjoy the after effects.
Right. You feel great after the fact. And so you can still generate clicks and hearts and sell things to women by saying, don't do that thing that's so difficult. It's not good for you. And yet, where are the labs? Where's the personal stories? The one who said, I was miserable and wretched and my thyroid was all dysregulated. And then I stopped doing ice baths and it fixed everything. You will never see that story on social media because it doesn't exist. Just the opposite is the case. One woman who's a medical doctor in Scottsdale, you can follow her, Dr. Courtney Hunt. She had Hashimoto's, which is a thyroid disorder.
Yeah.
And how did she fix it? Ketosis, sunlight, and cold plunge. And she's not the only one. There are several documented cases of women who have reversed thyroid disorders. Graves' disease is a thyroid disorder. And you know what they do? They say, here's how we're going to fix your thyroid disorder. We're going to kill your thyroid, surgically remove it, and then replace its function with pharmaceuticals that you will be dependent upon for the rest of your life.
Oh.
What the hell is that? How about maybe you get in a cold bath and you recruit some brown fat, and this will modulate your thyroid function, and then we'll check and see if you still have Graves' disease, because there are documented cases of women who have reversed it, essentially cured themselves from Graves, although I don't think I'm allowed to say that, by using cold plunge. Cold plunge is one of the best things you can do for your thyroid. However, telling women that they should be comfortable is one of the best things that you can do for your sales.
Yeah, it's a marketing game.
Exactly right. And a lot of women who want to hear it will applaud those messages. See, I don't have to do cold plunge. Right. I heard on social media that it was bad for me.
Yeah.
And so now the guys come up to me and they say, Tom, I love this. This changed my life. How do I get my wife to do it?
Yeah, that's the predicament.
I believe the women who say, I was like this, and then I started ice baths, and now I'm like that. When they're able to say what their personal experience has been, That has a lot of credibility. I don't give a shit about your double-blind, randomized, controlled gold standard placebo study,
Totally.
whatever it is, because nothing matters more than your N=1 experience. So
Totally.
if you see someone you admire and she says, I had a complete hysterectomy and then I had an oophorectomy. I can't even pronounce it. Then I had my ovaries out. And so my doctor put me on testosterone replacement therapy because I was told that the ovaries are responsible for about a quarter of my total testosterone production. And now I'm surgically menopausal, and I'm worried about my testosterone levels, the energy, the confidence, the libido, everything comes with that. And so the clinician adapted a male protocol of testosterone replacement therapy for me because there's no such thing as an FDA-approved female protocol for
Yeah.
testosterone. And then I started ice baths. And now I have 10 times the testosterone in my bloodstream than I did before ice baths. I feel great. Those aches and pains I used to complain about are gone. I'm 60 years old and I'm horny all the time. And I love the confidence and I'm ready to get into the flow of things. And my doctor's going to take me off of TRT. And then she says, Professor Seager, do you think it's the ice baths? And then
Yeah.
I can say, first of all, it doesn't matter. Like, it's working for you and that's doing great. But let me tell you where the other 75% of the testosterone in your body is coming from. Your skin cells, your fat cells, and your adrenal glands. Guess what stimulates the skin and the fat and the adrenal glands better than anything else in the world? It's the cold bath. That's a story I can get behind because it's working well for her. And then there are scientific mechanisms that we can explain and say, well, maybe this is why it's working. But Lindsay, all I can do to you or for you is to say, try it.
Yeah.
See, is it working for you too? Because everybody is entitled to take charge of their own health.
I love it. It is the N=1 case studies that we need to hear more and more of. And, I can absolutely say that cold plunging helped my overall health. There's no doubt that it supported my thyroid, my metabolism. And for those listening and for you, like I did it at least 2 or 3 times a week. Didn't matter what part of my cycle. I definitely did it more in the beginning of my cycle than the end, probably because I was a little grouchy. But it's you hit really like the nail on the head with the mental game of it. And I kind of want to like bring it back to that is the and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but is 3 minutes like the ultimate physiological benefits of the ice bath, or do
There
you
is
know?
no ultimate, there is no
Okay.
optimum. I'm really tired of this social media marketing that says, this is the optimal, ultimate, revolutionary,
All you
whatever.
got to do is 2 minutes or
Right. I can
yeah.
tell you what I do, 2 to 4 minutes.
Okay.
And I do it every day. I got a Morozco. You can, I don't know, maybe see it. It's out on my,
I
there it
see
is.
it. Yeah.
Out on my balcony, and I can go in whenever I want. And so
That's
I
cool.
don't go through the ritual of going to
Yeah.
the gas station and buying 200 pounds of ice. And because
Yeah.
when you do that, you're like, well, now to get my money's worth, I got to stay in there 10 minutes. No, I have a Morozco. I can go in 3 times a day. I can do 30 seconds if I want,
Yeah.
So I do 2 to 4 minutes. And
Cool.
sometimes, it's less. And sometimes, like, especially if I'm shooting a video or if I'm showing off to guests, I've done as much as 22 minutes, which is a lot of
Dang.
cold, right?
Yeah.
But they say, whoever they is, anything more than 4 minutes is just showing off. Sometimes I like you showing off.
Yeah.
2 to 4 minutes is enough. It's the first 30 seconds where you have activated the sympathetic division of your central nervous system, that fight or flight response. And then you've given it just enough time to structure your breathing and for your parasympathetic nervous
Yeah.
system, for your dive reflex to take over.
Yeah.
Your heart rate comes down. You're like, oh, what
Yeah.
was I worried about?
Yeah.
And
I'm good. We're good.
right. This
Yeah.
actually, it feels, I could stay in here if I
Mhm.
want. And then I get a little bored and I'm like, no, actually, I got a podcast coming up. So I got to get out. It's that first, Mike Mutzel calls it microdosing the cold. And
That's
that is
brilliant.
where, right, just 30, 45 seconds is a victory. Now,
Yeah,
because I'm male, for me to get the testosterone boost, I got to go a little longer than a woman would, and I got to exercise afterwards.
I
You're
have heard
surprised.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, men and women are different. And I don't
Mhm.
know why we have to go on Twitter and explain this to people, but men and women have different bodies. A lot of things are the same,
True.
right? But testosterone is one of the important differences. Men have so much testosterone that it wouldn't be right to say, 3/4 of the testosterone in a man's body is made in the skin cells and the fat cells and the adrenal. That's not true, because men have so much and it's coming from the testes. The
Mhm.
testes are outside the body. Men respond to cold differently than women do. And men must exercise after they're cold to get that testosterone boost, but women don't. And
That's awesome.
it starts right away. They get some cold stimulation, and you can measure the testosterone in their saliva almost immediately.
Love
So
it.
maybe one of the reasons that these men are saying, how do I get my wife, to do it with me, is because testosterone is the lust hormone. And I have
Yeah, they're like
experienced.
ready. Yeah.
Yep. Maybe
They're
the men are
ready.
like,
They're ready to
no,
make babies.
exactly right. Yep. And
Uh,
AJ and I have experienced this together. There's a video, you can read about it online, but all of the neurochemicals associated with love are stimulated by the cold plunge. Now, if you get in there by yourself, I don't know who you're going to fall in love with, but if you get in there, with your partner, and you're
Yeah,
holding hands and you're breathing together and you're doing this, eye contact thing,
yeah,
and all of a sudden the vasopressin is coming up and the oxytocin is coming up and the testosterone is coming up and the norepinephrine. How could you not fall in love with that person?
totally,
Right? This is
totally.
the experiences that AJ and I have had.
Love it. That's my husband and I, we did a ice bath, cold plunge experience, one of the first dates we had, and then we went and took a beautiful nap after that. Like, it was awesome.
Yep.
Um,
I'm so glad to hear that that worked well for you too.
we made a baby later.
Yeah.
So, okay, the mental aspect of it for women, I think, is huge, and that's the carryover from preconception into pregnancy into the birth experience. And I know absolutely without a doubt that my time in the cold plunge helped me mentally for birth. And I shared with you I had a home birth. It was on our back porch. It was in a tub. I don't know what the temperature was, but I would not describe that birth experience as painful at all or uncomfortable. It was the best trip I've had of my life. It was a mega dose, not a microdose. And it was the mental game is huge. And I think having sat in, I probably started ice baths in 2016. And I need to get a Morozco, but we'll talk about those in a second. So putting the ice in the tubs or the troughs, like that's what I was doing. And the mental game it helps you so much. And like I could see the carryover into work, into my everyday life. And then the ultimate was being that birth experience. And I don't know of any other lifestyle practice that has that mental training. And as a woman, I want to sit here and share with other women, like, yes, we can do hard things, and we can do hard things that equal a phenomenal birth experience. So why not try cold plunges, before you actually get to the main event? So before we get off, can you share a little bit about Morosco, where people can go to find the tub, maybe some of the features that set it apart, and then I'll let you go.
Morozcoforge.com. If I could do it over, I'd probably make the same mistake again. Morozco is a metaphor. It is a Russian fairy tale character, kind of like Jack Frost. It's the winter warlock, and he uses the magical powers of the cold. And it's a story that Russian parents would tell their children to try and convince them to behave, or Morozco's going to come get you. I wanted that metaphor. So we
Mm,
named the company after like this magical, cold, intimidating figure. But
yeah.
if you are brave and courageous, then Morozco will reward you, right? Because the magic can be used. That's great. I should have called this company besticebath.com or,
Yeah.
something quite literal. And I should have done the influencer game and the digital marketing and the click. I should have taken this route of trying to trick people into buying my product, which is the way digital marketing works.
Oh,
Because when we
totally.
started, Google hated us. We are now, the number one search result for 4 different misspellings of Morozco. If
Oh,
you
there you go.
search for ice bath, you will be buried under ads from companies that want to sell you a cheap Chinese toy and like an inflatable tub and stuff like that. And you're going to have to go down to like the 5th page to find Morozco. But if you search for Morozco, we will be on the 1st page and you will find super expensive ice baths. You're like, I can't believe I could get a used car for this much money. And it sounds terrible. But we don't price ourselves for scale. We don't price ourselves, for drop ship, click to buy. We price ourselves like this. You can reverse type 2 diabetes. What's that
Mhm.
worth to you? And when you've reversed your type
Yeah.
2 diabetes in 10 days, are you done? Or is this something that you want to do for the rest of your life? Because our
Yeah.
customers, they come to us when they're ready to do this every day, when they're making a
When they're
permanent
life change.
commitment. Exactly. When they say,
Yeah.
I am ready to take charge of my health, that's when you need a Morozco.
Love it. And I want to share like some of the cool features of it. It's like it makes its own ice. It's ozone sanitized, right? And there's no chlorine. I think those are some of the
You don't
cool.
want chlorine anywhere near your body when you're pregnant. Chlorine,
No.
it leads to carcinogenic chemicals. It's not a natural thing. Ozone is made in the atmosphere by lightning. Like we have evolutionary experience with ozone.
Love it.
Sometimes it's called the smell of electricity. It is 3 oxygen molecules, and it is the most powerful aquatic disinfectant, but it has a very short lifetime. It's unstable. And so the boards of health and the water treatment facilities, this goes right back to my environmental engineering training. They require chlorine because that's the only way to ensure that the disinfectant will reach your tap. And then you and I
Mm,
are like, get the chlorine out of my water, before I
yeah.
drink it.
Yeah.
Morozco uses ozone and only ozone, and it makes it on a continuous basis. So even though ozone is highly reactive with all the pathogenic material or all the organic matter, and it's made constantly, you might smell a little bit of ozone, which tells you that the system is working,
I like
but
the
you're
smell.
I like it too. But your nose is an extremely reliable detection instrument. Your nose will detect ozone at 1/5 the EPA or OSHA allowable levels. So if you
Wow.
smell it, that is not a cause for concern. It's like, yeah, it's working. You could turn the
Yeah.
filtration off right then if you want to, because it's like done its job. But it will make the ozone all the time, keep the water disinfected without chlorine, without bromine, without stabilizers, without cyanic acid, without all the other
Yeah.
things that are in the pool that you want nowhere near your baby.
That's awesome. I love it. Okay. Did I miss anything? I'm sure I did. I mean, like I said, I could chat with you forever, but I promised 12 and we're 15 over.
Well, there's one thing I want to ask you,
Great.
because there is this phenomenon called postpartum depression.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping you know a lot more about it than I do. Cold plunge therapy has been used to resolve depression, to banish suicidal thoughts, to essentially cure people who have not responded to talk therapy or to SSRIs or anything else that psychology has to offer. And
Yeah.
there's some good reasons for it. The dope hit is terrific. The metabolic improvement is terrific. Give your brain the energy that it needs. It stimulates ketosis.
Mhm.
It's the fastest route to ketosis because it will stimulate ketone production immediately, and your brain
Mm,
prefers ketones. So there's all these good
yeah.
sort of medical things. But postpartum depression is one of these like very narrow diagnoses that I think people carry shame or has become stigmatized. And I don't have, because there's not an enormous population of people at my disposal. I don't have case studies. I've only got one woman who she gave birth. It was her first child, and she was feeling down in the dumps. And she said, "Can I come over?" "Anytime you want." She did
Yeah.
not put her baby in. She just went in by herself, and she got that feeling of euphoria. It lifted up her mood. And I'd like to know, Lindsay, your thoughts on,
Totally.
cold plunge and postpartum.
I know we didn't even hit on it. Jeez. Okay. So I think absolutely. Let me back up and say, like, postpartum depression, postpartum mood and anxiety disorders, I think come from, they're overdiagnosed because I think they come from a state of depletion and lack of nourishment. I think if we set our moms up for success in other ways, like let's put food in the freezer, have a meal train, have community, get them in the sunshine, like you were saying, like, so like the diagnoses could be so much less than they are. Um, I waited until it was about 12 weeks, and I think that was perfect for me. Um, and what I focused on, especially the first 30 days, like I didn't really leave the bed. I had a great lying-in period. I had meals, I had hot teas and broths and that kind of thing. And then I started venturing around the house. But every morning I would get outside to get the sunshine and me and baby. And I think that's huge.
Yep.
Um, it was so beneficial. And we were talking about your baby sleeping. I think that helped my baby sleep. Like just, she started getting in my rhythm and like our rhythm, the rhythm of our house. And so that was good. And I started probably a little bit before 12 weeks with showers, like ending my showers with a bit of cold. And I totally felt refreshed because we were talking about showers, like warm showers are a luxury. They're definitely a luxury postpartum. Um, and then one day I was just like, okay, let's do it. Like I feel great and I want that, euphoric hit. And I went out there and I just kind of what you were talking about earlier. You said you do 2 to 4 minutes. I was like, I have no expectations. I just want to get in, see what I feel. And it was probably somewhere in between like 55 and 65. I don't know the exact, but I did it to the same, I stayed around the same temperature as the rivers around here. And the rivers are super cold, lower 60s, upper 50s. Just depending on what season. And that's what I stayed at for, a couple months. And I got in just whenever I felt like it. Some days would be longer than others. Other days, I would always try to do I always counted on breaths. So I knew if I could do 10 long inhales and exhales, that was about a minute, maybe 12 breaths, depending on how fast I was breathing. So my goal was always 10 to 12 breaths. And then anything beyond that was bonus. But that's kind of how I started. And, I don't do it every day, but like I said, I'm back to the 2 to 3 times a week of cold therapy. And it's kind of based on what I feel. And I still get, no matter how long you do this, I still get that anxiety right before of like, oh God, I don't want to do this. Like you said. But I feel great afterwards. And, I think it's been super beneficial for even healing my skin. And I don't know, we could go down research rabbit holes as far as like healing the tissue, the collagen, the connective tissue.
Yep.
Because I've gone down looking at sunlight and how that increases the serotonin and smooth muscles. And I had no issues with DRA, diastasis, or pelvic floor dysfunction or anything. I just feel like I gave my body time and the natural biological tools, and it, sort of healed itself, which is, I think, beautiful.
It makes a ton of sense. It reminds me to caution women about sauna during pregnancy or even leading up to conception. Because there's a lot online now about, hey, sauna is so good and all the health benefits, and men and women are different. A man trying to conceive should avoid the sauna because even though it won't take his testosterone down, it will inhibit sperm production. So men, stay away from the sauna if that's a limitation in your attempt to conceive. But everything that I've read in the epidemiological studies says that a woman trying to conceive or a pregnant woman should avoid sauna. There are no case studies that have come to my attention of women who saying, well, I was really struggling with my health and I was swelling. And then I started doing sauna when I was pregnant and everything got better, because there are reasons those case studies don't exist. Heat is not healthy for pregnant women, but breastfeeding women, get yourself right back in the sauna after the baby is no longer gestating inside your womb. Your metabolism is undergoing drastic change. You now have to feed the baby through the mammary glands rather than through the placenta. And sauna is fine from everything that I've read. And you waited 12 weeks, which I think is very conservative. If you feel the impulse to try the cold shower or to try the cold tub in that sort of postpartum period, just try it. Because there aren't adverse health effects to be concerned about during that period. See if you get the energy. See if your milk, sometimes women will say, well, I'm worried that the vasoconstriction might inhibit my milk flow. And I've never heard, it's a concern, but I've never heard a woman complain of that or report that to me. Just the opposite is true. And so if it works for you.
Yeah, I never had an issue with milk supply. And I would add, if I'm somebody that would definitely go try all the alternative things before going on any pharmaceutical. So if I was in the fork in the road of like, do I go on an SSRI or do I try a cold plunge? I would definitely, if it was 6 weeks, if it was 5 weeks, wherever.
Yep. I agree.
Like there's less risk to that for sure.
I think we just lost our connection.
Can you hear me?
Now you're coming back. I can hear
you
you.
hear me?
Your video. Oh, now your video is
sorry.
Yep.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I think that's telling us time's up.
Yep.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your wisdom and sharing your expertise with our community. I will link up Morozco in the show notes, and I look forward to chatting again in the future, hopefully.
Yeah. Thank you, Lindsay. This has been terrific. I'll talk to you soon.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Bye, Tom.
Bye-bye. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to do something, and I don't want to touch it until it's